At the heart of the Huberson Project is a discovery. The Huberson Project is a new executive design house which guides leaders toward a new way of seeing and a new way forward for genuine stewardship of self, company, and the world.
Some of the examples that were given in the book were showing how different CEOs had reframed their vision. And as we began to review that, we started to get very present to from what context are you doing it. So if you look at one of the credit companies that were in this book, they were working to get market share away from some of their competitors. And what he came to in this instance was the vision was to kill cash. Well, we were in a time in the world in which we were moving to online business. We were moving to more digital payment anyway. And what he determined at that point is that there were 85% of the population that were still using cash. And so they went after that particular population within their company. And then they converted that vision into strategies for how they would do business differently, or how they would diversify their client base, or how they would build new business out of that. It doesn't quite give us a way to do business differently that takes into account the world was, yes, he was able to capitalize on something and reorient his business so that they could take advantage of what was happening in the world already, paying attention to the trends and looking at what was happening. And as we look at what it means to create a vision and set the direction of a company, there's more involved for us to be present to and create an awareness of, and start to ask questions about where is this headed and what's the future that wants to happen. Many of the decisions that we make actually leave life out of the equation. So in killing cash, what would happen to the quality of our lives? What would happen to how we treat nature? I'm not saying there was a good or bad decision about that, but it became more about money and the competition and a way to get there. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not the point of this conversation. The point is we really could be doing so much more that doesn't have us make decisions that put up there to be destroyed our world around us.
If we say that CEO's job, I guess if that's the word, the CEO's stewardship is at the intersection of all contradictions.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're setting the vision from a place at the intersection of all contradictions.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not including that at the intersection of all contradictions, what's going to happen is being decided by at a meta level that isn't up to you.
Yeah.
Then the reframe for how you're going to play the game in your enterprise. You have the power to change that within your organization. It's just that I think sometimes we forget that when you hear the announcement that everything about how you thought it is going to go and how we do business and how we think about money and politics is about to change radically. And they're telling you this will be the largest disruption since apple pie.
Yeah.
And that's something that you hear consistently now.
Right.
Oh, we're about to make the announcement and we're about to make the announcement and it will change everything. And we're about to make the announcement and it'll change everything about how we do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And that's coming exponentially faster. And then what's the context from which you decide how you're going to reframe the game of how your company is going to function? The intersection of all contradictions at the meta level that is moving meta to what's happening in any particular executive suite.
Mm-hmm.
What's the questions you'll be asking?
Mm-hmm.
And that is at a level of complexity that doesn't just how do we address the current complexity, but how do we address the unknown unknowns, and how do we deal skillfully with the uncertainty of the unknown unknowns? Mm-hmm. The black swans and the green swans and the white swans, the unexpected. that regardless of how you think you're going to reframe the game, will catch you by surprise.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
is life in the 21st century.
Yeah.
So it's a different kind of question to ask about how you define the space of interest, how you're going to reframe the game you're playing in. And then so that you come from this place of view, a more cross-discipline, cross-cultural, cross-functional, cross-domain view that allows you to maybe do that before you strategically analyze what you think is going to be the trend, and then from that strategy define how you're going to reframe the game, that you are present to the reframe of the reframe of the reframe, many of those reframes that are out of your control.
Yeah.
Before you start strategizing about how you think the trend is going to go in the world we're going to encounter, and what if the world is unlikely to be however you think it's going to be, then how will you allocate or reallocate your resources? So you could strategize how you're going to reframe the game based on your assessment of how you think it's going to go, and then create a vision for how you'll reallocate the resources. Or you could be present to the vision first, and allow the strategy to emerge from that more complex co-creation with the future that wants to happen, that is happening and wants to happen, which means that then you are going to have the possibility of being more in harmony with what's emerging.
One of the big things that's being talked about for successful CEOs is not so much dwelling at the intersection of all contradiction like you're pointing to, Daniel. It's more about being bold. And so once you, from your space of interest, have identified how you're going to reframe it, then being bold means make those big moves early and make them as often as you can, because that's how you'll start to take your company from the middle of the stack up to the top. And sometimes what that often does is have us, to your point, not really allow that vision to really unfold in co-creating with life, but then it has us do these bold moves that impacts the world we live in ways we didn't expect or didn't think about, because we didn't take a different approach that included life. I was working with a man who was very successful hedge fund manager, and he was in a company back east that actually was one of the top and had a great reputation. And as he was doing further research, he saw that the investments they were making to get the return for the people they were getting was destroying orangutan habitat. And this company was also promoting itself from a vision of not being somebody who would destroy the earth. So rather than change their investing strategy, they put a nonprofit firm in place and invested in the nonprofit to build up orangutan habitat, effectively not helping anything. And that's sadly sometimes how it goes, because we invest capital, we buy and sell things, we differentiate ourselves, we do all the financial moves there are to do strategically. And then we see, oh, we put all this money here, but now we're destroying the environment. So rather than make changes that would upset state shareholders, perhaps, we'll just put in a nonprofit that will take care of it. And that's the kind of short-term and short-change thinking that can come out of not doing it in a way that you started to line up here, Daniel. That there is a reframe that's much deeper and more aligned with life to learn what it is, to create that vision and allow it to unfold.
We're at a time also where that reframe, so you were just giving an example of an environmental consequence. Of, let's say, the initiative, that the way you've put it together is making money and showing a profit, and that's fine. It does have a consequence, though. And so then you say, well, let's reframe the way we do business so that it's more, let's say, quote unquote, sustainable. And that also sounds good. There's a larger reframe that's emerging now about the, let's say, the climate change benchmark. That if we don't XYZ, then we'll have exponential consequences environmentally.
Yeah.
And there are other categories like that.
Yeah.
Many of the solutions that are being considered in many of the initiatives that well-meaning people have actually engaged in to be some kind of a remedy for the
Mhm.
consequence of the way we've been doing business is woefully inadequate.
Yeah.
And not to cast aspersions around any of those efforts, to just say that there's a reframe that's calling for us to do something, let's say, a little bit more or a lot more exponential, or do something that will actually move the needle, because while some of these things are good and better than nothing, they're not really creating enough momentum in the changes in a spectrum of time that'll help.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's becoming more and more pressing. So there's a reframe for how business, the context from which you decide you're going to reframe how you're doing business, needs a more engaged conversation at a level that would actually move the needle and not just look good or not just sound good. And maybe even, I mean, and not to say with the best of intentions, the conversation hasn't met the level yet that would have the actual transformational change be up to.
Yeah.
It's needing to be for us to not hit those benchmarks.
Yeah.
We will hit those benchmarks, and the consequences will be more dramatic than they probably even than we think they might be.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, and I'm optimistic. I'm just saying that in the terms of how you're going to create your strategy and how you're going to allocate your reallocate or allocate your resources needs a much higher level conversation in terms of the vision for how you are going to set the direction.
Yeah.
That includes a high enough level of the conversation for actually reframing the game.
Yeah.
That allows us to, let's say, hit benchmarks that we would choose, rather than the ones that will be at the effect of, that would actually make the difference that makes the difference.
Yeah. Yeah, because we don't often see, because we're not engaged in that kind of a conversation, Daniel, the impact years later. And there are some tough decisions that need to get made about how will we do this. And so the conversation we need to engage in together has to include now, how's this impacting 10, 20, 30 years out? And how would we see this scenario would play out? Not to figure it out, but to really see, we've got to co-create with life and start to ask different questions, and then start to track the questions behind the questions to really get to a way of doing it that includes all of us moving forward. There's an impact that happens that we don't expect when we're not clearly looking at a context from where this reframe and how we're going to reframe the game and what can happen as a result.
We have a generation coming now for whom the prospect of owning a home is unlikely.
Yeah, very unlikely.
There was a time when everyone sort of thought that was a pretty general possibility for most people, that you would own a home and that might be a place to invest and start to create wealth for your family. And now there's a generation growing up now that said that they never expect to own a home.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily good or bad, except that it does have a consequence economically and socially.
Yeah.
So there's decisions that are made that do reflect in challenged ecosystems, challenged social systems. The conversation for sustainability, way past that being helpful or any solution. The regenerative and the restorative conversations, more helpful, still not far enough.
Yeah.
So then what's the reframe for how we will do business and how you will set the direction and the vision for your enterprise. That it might be more the remedy and less the malady, and actually a remedy that might actually move the needle, to at least have the conversation about that you might consider of that larger context and larger conversation when you're setting the direction, and that your strategy and allocations will come downline from that level of context, rather than setting the strategy or having strategic assessments of what you think the future might be, and then how do I allocate my buying and selling and mergers and acquisitions so that we can move to the head of the pack.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the future will be, and oh yeah, the side effect that might be this thing or the other thing, and oh well.
Yeah. A whole financial services industry bloomed in the 70s. Before that, homes weren't considered an investment. They were considered a home, a shelter, a roof over your head. You didn't see much appreciation of the value of a home because it wasn't treated that way. Decisions were made and industries were created that actually turned a home into an investment. And when you turn the home into an investment, you essentially start to build it like a credit card. I can make money on this. So when I sell my home, if I don't see an appreciation and I think I deserve that, then we're artificially pumping the price of the home up that makes it impossible for this next generation to buy a home. To have a pretty regular size home, 24 or 3,000 square feet, in the Vancouver, BC market to cost about $5 million, anywhere from $3 to $5 million is part of what we're saying. You see that in Seattle and San Francisco and major cities. Versus a guy, I cannot remember his name at this point, who looked out to see how he could support his community. And he had some expertise in finance and banking. And what he saw is that oftentimes very small business owners or families really just needed a small amount of money to make it, a small amount of money to fund their small business or an enterprise that they had started in the community. And he invented an industry of microloans. And microloans became a major tool for ending hunger, for helping people be responsible to pull themselves out of poverty. That sometimes it wasn't the huge loan they needed. It was just the little one, $100 here, $25 there. And so he created in a way in which they could get the loan and they could pay it back. And it could continue to be this give and take that then supported the growth of their company, which fed their family, which helped their community. That's the kind of thing that we're pointing to that could be the way we do business now, as opposed to I want to get my company from the middle to the top. What if I'm looking to see how I expand the middle class in a Pacific Northwest, or how I start to move a region of the country into a different arena that would help them feel like they were of worth and of value to the rest of the country. And right now, I think there are regions and there are places where they're just poverty ridden, and it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way at all. So how do we start to change the way we're looking at what kind of visions we have and how we co-create that with life, with a future that wants to happen and is emerging? It's a different skill set and it's a different kind of conversation. And we're not talking about greenwashing. And we're not talking about putting your conscience in place, like building a nonprofit so you can restore the habitat you destroyed, which won't be the same, by the way. It won't ever be the same once it's destroyed. It took centuries for a rainforest or orangutan habitat to help a tribe of orangutans survive. And just by saying, oh, we're going to put a nonprofit so they rebuild it, isn't the same thing at all. And that's the short-sightedness that just reframing the game from the way we've been doing it. There's more we can do.
I might say that there's additional piece to look at in terms of setting the vision.
Mm-hmm.
One could say that that's all very altruistic and kind of airy-fairy and like,
Right.
this is the world of business, and the board won't be happy, and maybe my team won't be happy, and they'll say that you're dreaming and all those things. Well, in terms of setting the vision and reframing the game, is there a conversation about not assuming that that's true? Then,
Yeah.
and if you do assume that's true, you will frame it in a way that you'll be apologizing for it. So can you reframe how you think about the context for setting the direction
Yeah.
that says, okay, people might be skeptical. Then if I include that, if I factor that in, how resourceful and creative can I be in coming up with a manner in which we can go in that direction
Yeah.
that still accounts for making a profit, still accounts for the company moving up in its index
Yeah.
relative to the competition. Maybe is there a way to move in that direction that also allows you to capture market share and all those sort of business considerations? If we don't just assume that to be practical in business, we have to make those sacrifices.
Yeah.
If you
Exactly.
assume that, then that's how you'll see it and that's how it'll go. But can you at least be in the conversation about how is it possible
Yeah.
that you could reframe the game and set the direction that allows for you to make strategic moves and allocate resources in a way
Yeah.
that actually will move the needle for
Yeah.
the betterment of the world while making a profit, increasing market share, seeing profits, all those things
Mhm.
in the context for how you reframe the game and set the direction.
This is also where a CEO or leader's personal effectiveness will support how you reframe the game. Without your up-leveling of skill and dynamic inquiry and asking different questions or learning how to reframe a context in the way that we're speaking about, including life, including the future that's already reimagined us. There are specific practices and skills to up-level that will help having these conversations, both individually with your team and collectively with your company and community that you serve.
If you don't ask the question, it will not emerge for you.
You've been listening to the Hugh Person Project, where leading with the future is the difference that makes the difference. Thank you to Lindsay Sterling for the music. If you'd like to stay tuned to further episodes, please subscribe to this podcast. See you in the next episode.